Has to be fair trade. The time for trivial fights is behind us.
We're gonna meet Joseph Patrick Kennedy III of RFK's lineage. So don't get confused, right? Joe 1, RFK, Joe 2, Joe 3. So it's not Joe 1, 2, 3. It's Joe 1, RFK, Joe 2, Joe 3. So you have Joe Kennedy, who's going to give the response to Trump's first State of the Union. So this is historic, Trump's first State of the Union. Remember when he basically scared the living piss out of everybody during the campaign when all eyes were on him? So the American dream was dead. There was a Holocaust apocalyptic nightmare upon the United States. Essentially, the U.S. was a shithole. So has Donald Trump turned that shithole around? Is it now great? Have we made America great again?
So what will people be watching for tonight? The BBC's Anthony Zerko joins me now with his...
Well, I think what we're hearing is it's supposed to be upbeat. He's going to boast about the economy, about unemployment being low, particularly about consumer and business optimism going up. I think he feels like there's a good record to point to. While he listed a lot of things he wanted to do in this speech last year, didn't check off a lot of boxes except for tax reform. The good thing about tax reform now is it allows him to take ownership of the economy.
It is a huge honor for Joe Kennedy III to be selected by Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader of New York, or of United States, but Schumer of New York, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi of California. Both of them, Pelosi and Schumer, had tapped Joe Kennedy on the shoulder to give this address. So I have mixed feelings about that. Schumer, not as much. Pelosi, she basically laughed at the idea of socialism. We're capitalists. Let me just put that. We're all capitalists around here. Yeah, you're neoliberal, corporatist, capitalist, and if he's a Hillary Clinton kind of Democrat, essentially a Republican light kind of Democrat, imperialist, corporatist, capitalist, right-wing, fascism, then fuck him. But if he's a progressive, which he's got some really progressive...
Forward tone is extremely important. So I think that the president would do very well to have a military tone.
Congressman, this is your first State of the Union as well. You've been there for a year. What surprised you most about working in Washington? Is it the gridlock? Is it the lack of bipartisanship?
Well, I tried to have no expectations when I came in here so that I wouldn't be let down. But what I will say is I am surprised at the divisiveness in the country right now. I come from Virginia. I served 2 terms in the Virginia State House. And in Virginia, we have what's called the Virginia Way, and we reach across the aisle, and we find common ground, and we move that forward.
Joseph Patrick Kennedy III, he has, a name. It's a blessing and a curse. He's probably been writing on his name for quite some time. But he actually seems like a fairly decent man. So he's the grandson of Bobby Kennedy. He's a U.S. federal congressman. He's a Democrat, and he represents the 4th Congressional District of Massachusetts. So he represents the 4th Congressional District. So that's who he is, right? That's his namesake for the last 4 years, starting in 2013. Joseph P. Kennedy III has been a U.S. representative. So Joseph Kennedy ran to replace retiring Representative Barney Frank in 2012. He won 90% of the Democratic primary vote, defeating Republican Sean Bilat 61% to 36% in the general election. Kennedy ran unopposed in 2014. The Republicans were too afraid of Joe Kennedy III to even run against him for the 4th Congressional District of Massachusetts in 2014. Then 2016, he defeated his Republican challenger by more than 40 points. So he is just kicking ass and taking names, right? He's won 3 elections in a row, probably is going to win this election coming up. So he has a very safely Democratic seat there. He's helping the Democratic Party out, and now they're putting a young face in front of the cameras. Again, it's Pelosi and Schumer who tapped him on the shoulder. So that, again, is a blessing and a curse. So he gets to speak to the American people, but has he sold out any of his progressive values? Does he believe in, is he a progressive? Would he call himself a progressive?
Everyone, and welcome. It was ugly. Stocks fell sharply, extending yesterday's losses. Healthcare shares took a tumble, and we'll have more on that in just a moment. And bond yields rose to a near 4-year high, and that was enough to batter stocks, falling the most since August. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 362 points to 26,076. The Nasdaq was off 64. S&P 500 was down 31. Bob Bassani has more on today's sell-off from the New York Stock Exchange.
That steep sell-off continues today on Wall Street, bringing the Dow down 400 points at the session lows. We haven't seen that in a long time. Remember this game. The game for the last few months has been go long.
The Kennedy family only. Joe Kennedy III is working in federal government. One of his cousins is in the Connecticut Senate. But in terms of the American government, there's only one Kennedy that could become president, that could potentially, possibly, from out of nowhere, from out of right field, just draft past everybody and win the NASCAR championship and become the King, Lord, Emperor. Finally, the Imperial King. So Joseph Kennedy III, he's 36 years old. He is old enough to run for president. He was born in 1980 when Jimmy Carter just left office. Ronald Reagan became president to help save those hostages in Iran. That was very important to Americans in 1980, the hostages. Joseph Patrick Kennedy III is super credentialed. He graduated Stanford University, graduated Harvard Law School. So he has a degree in management science and engineering from Stanford, got his law degree right from Harvard. So he conquered Stanford and Harvard. He worked with the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, giving free legal service for low-income housing tenants getting evicted after a housing foreclosure crisis induced the Great Recession in 2008. So a pro bono law firm in Boston helped families avoid foreclosures and create a program for at-risk youth. So I like this. Low-income housing tenants to avoid foreclosure. He was perceptive to see what this was going to do to poor and working class people. This is important. I almost think it all comes down to economics. Does he give a shit about the homeless and the
after the Clintons, that's not the message here. The Joe Kennedy, who is the grandson of Robert Kennedy, the former Attorney General, great nephew of John F. Kennedy, the former president, he will be delivering the address. He's a member of Congress from Massachusetts, young, charismatic, obviously has the Kennedy name. It's interesting, he's delivering the speech in the town of Fall River, Massachusetts, which is a blue-collar working town, kind of post-industrial town, and I think the message they're trying to say is economic message. We care about jobs. We're a younger party because, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, they're not exactly fresh new faces. So these type of responses, the opposition responses, is all about putting the image of your party, contrasting with the president. Here we go. The message is young, economic focus.
Anthony Zerka, thank you so much for joining us.
Went to Harvard Law School, graduated in 2006, so just 11 years ago. While Joseph P. Kennedy III was a student, he co-founded an empowerment program for at-risk teens in Jamaica Plain and inner-city Boston neighborhood and worked with the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, free legal service for low-income housing tenants getting evicted after housing foreclosure crisis. So Joe Kennedy III is kind of a badass. I really like that he cares about working class poor people. These are low income. These are poor people, not the poorest, the homeless. So not the poorest of the poor out of all of us, but he does give a shit about the poor. And even though the poor don't vote, there's some people in the middle class that still give a shit about the poor, and they vote. So he's working for free in Boston, helping out low income. For the at-risk teens, that's good too. So he's cares about the poor. He cares about the troubled youth. Now, something fascinating, Joseph P. Kennedy III, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, the exact same first, middle, and last name as the patriarch. As the asshole, the patriarch is an asshole, but the third, RFK, is one of the most nicest, compassionate, sweetest, men in American politics ever, bar none, right? And that's where these two Joe Kennedys come from. He joined the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps is a program that JFK had started in 2004. He served for 2 years in the Dominican Republic. While he was there, he worked with local tour guides and unionized them to get higher wages. So he created a union with the local tour guides.
With, on certain metrics, the most expensive market we've ever seen. And now we have rising interest rates. And we have an intensification of Fed tightening via quantitative tightening and more rate hikes. And we have the ECB pulling back, and the Bank of Japan, and the Bank of England, and the Bank of Canada. And I'm worried that we're going to see multiple compression, which will be a dampener on markets.
So the past couple of...
The third also worked as an anti-poverty consultant for the government of East Timor. He was an analyst for the United Nations Millennium Project. He had a class under Elizabeth Warren at Harvard. It's where he met his wife, Joe Kennedy. In 2012, married Lauren Ann Birchfield. They had met at Harvard in a class taught by Elizabeth Warren, who would go on to become Senator of Massachusetts. Lauren Ann Birchfield is a healthcare policy lawyer, serves as the senior counsel at the National Partnership for Women and Families, and they had 2 children. They welcomed daughter Eleanor in 2015 and son James in December 2017. Joe Kennedy right now has an 8-week-old baby. So he's a baby himself. 37-year-old Joe Kennedy has an 8-week-old baby.
You may see infrastructure being kicked around. You may see immigration, talk about some foreign policy, but I think he wants to take credit for the rising consumer confidence.
Well, Donald Trump was a reality TV star. Tonight is a marquee primetime event. Millions of Americans will be watching. Can he use it to pivot?
Days have been a tremor. Do you see an earthquake coming? Do you see something different than that?
I think it will depend on the rapidity of this move higher in interest rates. If it continues, if we do see 3% plus in the 10-year, that's going to be a really big deal because, again, it happens in the context of an extraordinarily expensive market and an economy that has become addicted to very low interest rates.
Okay. Peter Maluk, let me go to you. You make the case, though, that we have a very healthy economy underlying, regardless of whether it's addicted to low interest rates. But can you still, given the run in this market, can you still find value here at home if indeed you think the bull case is still intact, or do you need to look elsewhere? To move to a more centrist kind of a note. I mean, he told reporters today that he wants to unite the country.
Right. Well, we've been talking about a Donald Trump pivot for years now, whether it was during the primary campaign, he was going to pivot and be more responsible when he became the nominee of the party. When he was elected, he was going to pivot and be more presidential. When he got inaugurated, he was going to pivot and be more presidential. Last year, he was going to pivot and be more presidential. I wouldn't hold my breath. We may see a very well-delivered speech tonight. He is capable. I'm a military guy. As a military, you don't care about if you're white, black, brown, gay, straight, where you come from, rich, poor. It doesn't matter. If you have things to do, you hold hands and you get it done. And that's what I'd like to see more of in Washington, and hopefully we have more folks in Washington, either here now or moving forward, that want to do that for the better of the country.
Remember, you can find much more on all the day's news at our website. Plus, to see what we're working on at any time, make sure to check out our Facebook page. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thanks for watching World News America. We will see. Congressman Scott Taylor, thanks very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you.
Well, I think you could. First of all, I don't think the markets are overvalued. If you go back to 2010, everyone complained that we had high unemployment and corporations didn't have enough cash. We didn't have good earnings growth. And today we have the opposite. We have exceptionally low unemployment. We're getting into the threes now, which is where you start to see wage inflation, which is a very good sign of economic strength. And I think that the market's also seeing corporations holding near record cash. And they look at more people employed, and people will probably have more money in their paychecks because we're going to see wage inflation. If you have unemployment go from 7% to 6%,
And now to the Democrats, who are livid about a Republican vote to release a secret memorandum. It's set to accuse the Justice Department and FBI of misusing their authority in the Russia investigation. The memo was commissioned by the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and the president now has 5 days to decide